She signed the papers that ended her marriage. What she didn't sign was permission to be hunted. Alessia Rivers walked out of that courthouse thinking the worst was behind her. A cheating husband, a failed marriage, a secret pregnancy she'd kept hidden. She was wrong. Her ex-husband didn't just abandon her. He stole millions from people who don't forgive debts. And when they couldn't find him, they came for her instead. Bound, terrified, and dragged into a warehouse to pay for crimes she didn't commit, Alicia learned a brutal truth. Some men destroy everything they touch, and some men burn the world down to protect what's theirs. If you want to see how far a dangerous man will go for the woman he chooses, stay until the end. And if this story grabs you, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. The courthouse smelled like old wood and broken promises. Alicia Rivers sat in the hallway outside Family Courtroom 3, her hands folded carefully in her lap, her spine straight despite the exhaustion pulling at her bones. The marble bench beneath her was cold, unforgiving, fitting, she thought, for a place where love came to die. Through the frosted glass doors, she could hear muffled voices. Lawyers, judges. The administrative dismantling of what she'd once believed would last forever. Her marriage to Marcus Chen was ending today, reduced to signatures and stamps and legal jargon that meant absolutely nothing in the face of what he'd done to her. She pressed her palm against her stomach, flat still, showing nothing, and felt the secret pulse there like a second heartbeat. 7 weeks. 7 weeks pregnant with the child of a man who'd looked her in the eye, promised her everything, and then vanished into the night with another woman and a trail of lies so thick she was still finding new ones buried in their joint bank statements. The door opened. Her lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Caroline Grant, stepped into the hallway with a leather portfolio tucked under one arm. "It's done," she said simply. "He didn't even show up to contest it. You're free, Alessia." Free. The word tasted like ash. Alessia stood, smoothing down the front of her navy dress, the one she'd worn to her sister's wedding 3 years ago, before Marcus, before everything. It was the only thing in her closet that still felt like hers. "Thank you, Caroline." "I wish I could say you're better off," Caroline said quietly, her expression softening. "But I know it doesn't feel that way yet." Alessia managed a thin smile. "It will, eventually." It had to. She signed the papers in a small administrative office with fluorescent lights that buzzed too loudly and a clerk who didn't look up once. Her hand didn't shake. She'd cried all her tears weeks ago, alone in the apartment Marcus had abandoned, surrounded by half-empty closets and the ghost of a life she'd never get back. When it was over, she walked out of the courthouse into the gray afternoon, her purse heavy with more than just her wallet and keys. Hidden in the inner pocket, wrapped in tissue paper, was the pregnancy test she'd taken that morning. 2 pink lines that changed everything and nothing all at once. She didn't know what she was going to do. She didn't even know if she could do this. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Marcus Chen would never know about this child. He'd forfeited that right the moment he'd chosen to disappear. The courthouse steps were slick with late autumn rain. Alessia gripped the iron railing and descended carefully, her heels clicking against the wet stone. The street beyond was busy, taxis honking, pedestrians rushing past with umbrellas, the city moving forward like it always did, indifferent to the small devastations happening inside its buildings. She was halfway down when she collided with him. It wasn't a gentle bump. It was a full-body impact, her shoulder slamming into a chest that felt like a brick wall, her purse flying from her grip, papers scattering across the steps in a chaotic flutter of white. "Damn it!" Alicia gasped, stumbling backward. A hand shot out and caught her elbow, steadying her with a grip that was firm but not harsh. "Careful." The voice was deep, controlled, edged with an accent she couldn't quite place. European, maybe. Smooth and dark like aged whiskey. Alessia looked up and froze. The man standing in front of her was striking. That was the only word for it. Tall, easily 6'2", with broad shoulders encased in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her rent. His hair was black, swept back from a face that looked like it had been carved from marble. Sharp jaw, high cheekbones, a mouth set in a line that suggested he didn't smile often. But it was his eyes that held her. Dark, intense, the kind of eyes that saw everything and gave away nothing. He was looking at her like she was the only person on the steps. "I'm sorry," Alessia said quickly, pulling her arm free. "I wasn't watching where I was going." Clearly. He bent down and began gathering the scattered papers with efficient, economical movements. Alessia crouched beside him, her cheeks burning. This was humiliating. The final cherry on top of the worst day of her life, running headlong into a stranger who looked like he'd stepped out of a crime thriller and making a complete fool of herself. "You don't have to," she started. He handed her a stack of papers, his gaze dropping to the top sheet, and then he went very, very still. Alessia followed his line of sight and felt her stomach drop. Dissolution of marriage. Alessia Marie Rivers versus Marcus Anthony. Chen. Her name. Marcus's name. Right there in black and white for the stranger to see. "That's private," she said sharply, snatching the papers from his hand. The man didn't react. He simply stood, brushing rain from his sleeves with slow, deliberate movements. When he looked at her again, something had changed in his expression, something dark and considering. "Marcus Chen," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Alessia felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. "Do you know him?" "I know of him." The man's gaze flicked over her, assessing, cataloging. "You were married to him." "Were." She shoved the papers into her purse and zipped it shut with more force than necessary. "As of 20 minutes ago, I'm happily divorced." "Happily?" One dark eyebrow arched. Relatively speaking, the corner of his mouth twitched. It might have been amusement. It was hard to tell with a face like that, so controlled, so unreadable. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, holding it out between two fingers. "If Marcus's past comes looking for you, call this number." Alessia stared at the card like it might bite her. Why would his past come looking for me? Because men like Marcus Chen don't just disappear, Ms. Rivers. They run. His eyes were steady, unflinching, and when they run, they leave debts behind. Her pulse kicked up. What kind of debts? The kind that get collected. He pressed the card into her hand, his fingers warm against her cold skin. "Keep that somewhere safe. You might need it." "Who are you?" Alessia demanded. For the first time, something almost like a smile crossed his face. Someone who pays his debts. And then he was gone, moving past her down the steps with the kind of fluid, predatory grace that made people instinctively step aside. Alessia watched him disappear into a black SUV idling at the curb, her heart pounding for reasons she didn't fully understand. She looked down at the card in her hand. No name, just a phone number embossed in silver ink. What the hell was that? She shoved the card into her purse and told herself to forget about it. Forget about the stranger with the dark eyes and the cryptic warnings. Forget about Marcus and whatever mess he'd gotten himself into. She had her own problems to deal with. She had a baby coming. The cafe where Alessia worked was a small corner place called Brew Haven, tucked between a dry cleaner and a used bookstore in a neighborhood that was trying very hard to be trendy and not quite succeeding. The coffee was decent, the tips were mediocre, and the owner, a kind woman named Greta, who never asked too many questions, let Alessia pick up extra shifts whenever she needed them, which these days was often. Alessia tied her apron around her waist and slipped behind the counter, forcing a smile she didn't feel. The cafe was quiet this afternoon, just a handful of customers scattered among the mismatched tables, nursing lattes and tapping away at laptops. "Rough day?" Greta asked, wiping down the espresso machine. "You could say that," Alessia murmured. Greta didn't push. She never did. That was one of the things Alessia appreciated most about this place. It was a refuge, a pocket of normalcy in a life that had gone spectacularly off the rails. She made coffees, she wiped tables. She smiled at customers and took orders and pretended that everything was fine. And for a few hours, it almost was. Until the door opened and 3 men walked in. Alessia didn't notice them at first. She was elbow deep in the sink, scrubbing espresso grounds from a portafilter, when Greta's voice cut through the cafe's gentle hum. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" Something in Greta's tone made Alessia look up. The 3 men standing just inside the door didn't look like the usual cafe crowd. They were too sharp, too still. 2 of them wore leather jackets despite the rain, their hands shoved into their pockets in a way that made Alessia's instincts scream wrong. The third, taller, older, with a scar running from his temple to his jaw, stood in the center, his gaze sweeping the room like he was cataloging exits. "We're looking for someone," Scarface said. His voice was flat, emotionless. Greta's smile tightened. "I'm sorry, this is a cafe, not a missing persons bureau." "Alessia Rivers." The name fell from his mouth like a stone. "We know she works here." Alessia's blood turned to ice. "I don't know who you're talking about," Greta said firmly. "You need to leave." Scarface's gaze landed on Alicia, and she saw recognition flare in his cold eyes. "There she is," he said. Everything happened very fast after that. Greta moved to block them, her hand reaching for the phone on the counter. One of the leather-jacketed men grabbed her wrist and shoved her back, hard. She stumbled, catching herself against the espresso machine with a cry of pain. "No!" Alessia shouted, lurching forward. Scarface closed the distance between them in 3 strides. His hand clamped around her upper arm like a vice. "You're coming with us." "Let go of me!" Alessia tried to wrench free, panic spiking through her veins. "I don't know you, I don't—" "Your husband stole from the wrong people, sweetheart," Scarface said, his breath hot against her ear. "And now you're going to help us get it back." "I'm not married!" Alessia screamed. "I signed the papers today. I'm divorced." "Not our problem." He dragged her toward the door. Alessia thrashed, clawing at his grip, her heels skidding against the tile floor. The other customers were frozen, staring in horror. Someone's phone was out, recording, maybe, or calling the police. But it didn't matter. These men didn't care. "Please," Alicia gasped. "Please, I don't know anything about—" Scarface backhanded her across the face. Pain exploded through her cheek. Her vision swam. She tasted blood. "Shut up," he snarled. They hauled her through the door and into the rain. A black van was idling at the curb, its side door already open. Alessia screamed, kicking, fighting with everything she had, but there were 3 of them, and one of her and her strength was nothing compared to theirs. They threw her into the van. She hit the floor hard, her shoulder slamming into the metal with a sickening crack. Before she could scramble up, someone yanked her arms behind her back and zip-tied her wrists together. The plastic bit into her skin, tight enough to make her fingers tingle. "No, no, no!" Alessia choked on a sob, her whole body shaking. "Please, I'm pregnant, please." "Should have thought about that before you married a thief." The door slammed shut. The van lurched into motion, and Alessia Rivers, 7 weeks pregnant and newly divorced, disappeared into the rainy afternoon without a trace. The warehouse was somewhere on the outskirts of the city. Alicia had lost track of the turns, the time, everything except the bone-deep terror that had her heart hammering against her ribs like it was trying to escape. They dragged her out of the van and into a cavernous space that smelled like rust and gasoline. Overhead lights flickered, casting long shadows across stacks of shipping crates and rusted machinery. It was the kind of place where bad things happened, where people disappeared. Alessia's knees buckled. One of the men caught her by the elbow and hauled her upright, shoving her forward until she stumbled into the center of the room. "Sit," Scarface ordered, pointing to a metal chair. She sat. What choice did she have? He crouched in front of her, his scarred face inches from hers. "Your husband stole $12 million from my employer. We want it back." "I don't have it," Alessia said, her voice shaking. "I don't have anything. Marcus left me with nothing. I didn't even know he was stealing." "Then you're going to help us find him." "I can't." Tears streamed down her face. "He's gone. He disappeared 2 months ago. I don't know where he is. I don't know how to reach him. I swear." Scarface straightened, pulling a phone from his pocket. He dialed a number, waited. "We have her," he said into the phone. A pause. "Understood." He hung up and looked down at Alessia with something almost like pity. "My employer says if we can't get the money from Chen, we'll get it from you, one way or another." Alessia's stomach twisted. "I told you, I don't—" "Then I guess you'd better start praying Chen loves you enough to come back for you." He turned and walked away, leaving her alone in the chair with her hands bound and her heart breaking. "Marcus won't come," she thought desperately. "He doesn't love me. He never did. She was going to die here." She and her baby were going to die here because of a man who'd thrown them away like they were nothing. The warehouse door opened. Alessia's head snapped up, hope and terror warring in her chest. But it wasn't the police. It wasn't a rescue. It was the stranger from the courthouse steps. He walked into the warehouse like he owned it, flanked by two men in dark suits who moved with the same predatory grace. His hands were in his pockets, his expression calm, almost bored. Scarface turned, surprise flickering across his face. "Russo, what the hell are you doing here?" Russo. The name seemed to suck the air out of the room. The stranger, Russo, stopped a few feet from Alicia's chair, his gaze sweeping over her with clinical precision. She saw his eyes linger on the bruise blooming across her cheek, the zip ties cutting into her wrists, and something dark and dangerous flashed in his expression. "Let her go," Russo said quietly. Scarface laughed. "This doesn't concern you." "It does now." Russo's voice was soft, but it carried an edge that made Alicia's skin prickle. "How much does Chen owe?" 12 million. "I'll cover it." Scarface blinked. "What?" "I'll cover Marcus Chen's debt," Russo repeated, his tone measured, deliberate. 12 million. Wired to your account within the hour. In exchange, you release the woman and walk away. Alicia stared at him, her mind reeling. Why would he? Scarface's expression darkened. "She's leverage. We need her to bring Chen in." "Chen is already dead," Russo said flatly. Silence. "He crossed the Volkov syndicate 3 days ago. They found him in Prague." Russo pulled out his phone, tapped the screen, and held it up. Even from where she sat, Alessia could see the photo, Marcus's face, slack and lifeless, a bullet hole in his temple. The world tilted. Marcus was dead. Dead. Gone. "So you see," Russo continued, pocketing his phone, "holding her is pointless. Chen can't pay you back, but I can. And I will. All you have to do is walk away." Scarface hesitated, his jaw working. "And if we don't?" Russo smiled. It was the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Then I'll make sure your employer understands exactly why his operation in this city no longer exists." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. Scarface stared at him for a long, tense moment. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Fine, cut her loose." One of the leather-jacketed men stepped forward, pulling a knife from his belt. He sliced through the zip ties with a quick, efficient motion, and Alessia's arms fell forward, numb and aching. 12 million, Scarface said. "Within the hour." "Done." Russo turned and walked toward Alessia, extending a hand. She looked up at him, this stranger who'd just paid $12 million to save her life, and felt the weight of everything crash down on her at once. She took his hand. He pulled her to her feet, his grip steady and sure. "Can you walk?" I think so." "Good." He guided her toward the door, one hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Protective, possessive. As they passed Scarface, Russo stopped. "If I hear that anyone connected to you has so much as looked at her again, I will burn everything you care about to the ground. Do we understand each other?" Scarface's throat bobbed. "Yeah, we understand." "Excellent." They walked out of the warehouse and into the rain. A black SUV was waiting, engine running. Russo opened the back door and helped Alessia inside, then slid in beside her. The door closed. The SUV pulled away. And Alessia Rivers, still shaking, still bleeding, still trying to process the fact that Marcus was dead and she was alive, turned to the man who'd saved her. "Why?" she whispered. Russo looked at her, his dark eyes unreadable. "Because I don't let what's mine get taken. I'm not yours. You are now." And somehow, sitting in the back of a stranger's car with rain drumming against the windows and her entire world shattered around her, Alessia couldn't find the strength to argue, because for the first time in months, she wasn't alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The SUV moved through the city like a shadow, silent and purposeful. Alessia sat rigid in the leather seat, her wrists still burning from the zip ties, her cheek throbbing where Scarface had hit her. The rain against the windows created a rhythmic white noise that should have been soothing, but instead felt like the soundtrack to a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. Russo sat beside her, his posture relaxed, one arm draped along the back of the seat. He hadn't said a word since they'd left the warehouse. He didn't need to. His presence filled the space between them like a physical weight, calm, controlled, and utterly terrifying in its certainty. Alessia pressed her hand against her stomach, feeling for that flutter of life she knew was too early to detect. 7 weeks. The baby was barely the size of a blueberry. But it was there. Real. And she'd almost lost it before she'd even had a chance to figure out what to do. "Where are you taking me?" Her voice came out hoarse, scraped raw from screaming. "Somewhere safe." That's not an answer. Russo turned his head, studying her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "My home." "No." Alessia shook her head, panic rising in her throat. "No, I need to go back to my apartment. Your apartment isn't safe." His tone was matter of fact, like he was discussing the weather. "The men who took you know where you live. They know where you work. They know everything about you because Marcus was careless with your information. If I take you home, they'll come back." "You paid them," Alessia said desperately. "You said you'd cover the debt." "I did. But money doesn't buy loyalty in this world, Alessia. It buys time." He shifted slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. "Right now you have enemies you don't understand and protection you didn't ask for. Until I'm certain you're no longer a target, you stay with me." I don't even know you." "No," Russo agreed. "But I know you. And more importantly, I know what Marcus was involved in. The people he stole from don't forgive. They don't forget. And they don't stop until they've extracted every last drop of payment, in cash or in blood." Alessia's hands were shaking. She clasped them together in her lap, trying to steady herself. "Why do you care? You don't owe me anything." Something flickered across Russo's face, so quick she almost missed it. "Let's just say I have a vested interest in making sure Marcus's mistakes don't claim any more victims." "That's not an answer either." The corner of his mouth lifted. Not quite a smile, but close. "You're observant. I like that." "I don't care what you like," Alessia shot back, her fear sharpening into anger. "You can't just decide I belong to you because you paid some money. I'm not property. I'm not—" "You're pregnant." The words hit her like a slap. Alessia went very still. "How did you—" "You told them in the van." Russo's expression was impossible to read. "You begged them not to hurt you because you're pregnant. 7 weeks, if I had to guess, based on the timeline of your marriage falling apart." She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. "Were you there? In the van?" "No, but I had people watching." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "The moment those men took you from the cafe, I knew. And I came." "Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. Russo was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it. "Because when I saw your name on those divorce papers this afternoon, I did my research. Marcus Chen has been on my radar for months. He stole from people connected to my organization. He made promises he couldn't keep. And when the walls started closing in, he ran, leaving you to clean up the mess he made." "I didn't know," Alessia said, her voice breaking. "I swear, I didn't know what he was doing." "I believe you." And somehow, the certainty in those 3 words made something inside her crack open, which is why you're under my protection now, whether you like it or not. The SUV turned onto a tree-lined street in a neighborhood Alessia recognized but had never actually set foot in, the kind of place where old money lived behind iron gates and security cameras. Mansion after mansion rolled past, their windows glowing warm against the gray evening. They pulled up to a pair of towering gates that opened automatically as the SUV approached. Beyond them, a long driveway curved through manicured grounds toward a house that looked like it belonged in a European postcard. Stone facade, tall windows, ivy climbing the walls in elegant green waves. "This is your home?" Alessia breathed. "One of them." Of course it was. The SUV stopped in front of the entrance. Russo's driver, a broad-shouldered man with silver hair and the kind of scars that told stories, opened Alessia's door and offered his hand. She hesitated, then took it, stepping out into the cool evening air. Her legs nearly gave out. Russo was there in an instant, his arm around her waist, holding her upright. "Easy, you're in shock." "I'm fine," Alessia lied. "You're not." He guided her up the stone steps and through the front door into a foyer that took her breath away. High ceilings, crystal chandeliers, marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. It was beautiful, intimidating. Nothing like the cramped one-bedroom apartment she'd been calling home. A woman appeared from a side hallway, older, maybe 60, with steel gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and shrewd eyes that took in Alicia's disheveled state in one sweeping glance. "Maria," Russo said, "this is Alicia Rivers. She'll be staying with us. Please prepare the guest suite in the East Wing and have Dr. Chen come by within the hour." Maria nodded once, crisp and efficient. "Of course, Mr. Russo. Does she need anything immediately?" "Tea, something to eat, and a first aid kit." "Right away." Maria disappeared as quickly as she'd appeared. Russo turned back to Alicia, his hand still resting lightly on her arm. "Maria runs this house. If you need anything, anything at all, she'll help you. Dr. Chen is my personal physician. She'll examine you and make sure you and the baby are all right after what happened." Alicia shook her head, pulling away from him. "I can't afford a private doctor. I don't have insurance anymore. Marcus canceled our policy when he—" "You're not paying for anything," Russo said flatly. "Stop thinking like you're still on your own, Alicia. You're not." "I don't understand any of this." Her voice cracked. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" Russo looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted. Softened, maybe. Or maybe she was just imagining it. "I want you to feel safe. That's all. People don't do things like this for nothing." "You're right," he said quietly. "They don't." Before she could ask what he meant, Maria returned with a tray bearing a delicate porcelain teapot and a plate of sandwiches. "The guest suite is ready, Mr. Russo. I've drawn a bath and laid out some fresh clothes. They may be a bit large, but they'll do until we can arrange something better." "Thank you, Maria." Russo gestured toward the grand staircase. "Come. I'll show you to your room." Alicia followed him up the stairs, her hand trailing along the polished banister, her mind spinning. This didn't feel real. None of it felt real. Just this morning, she'd signed her divorce papers. Just hours ago, she'd been working at the cafe, worrying about how she was going to afford prenatal vitamins. Now she was walking through a mansion with a man who'd paid $12 million to save her life. The guest suite was more like a small apartment, bedroom, sitting area, ensuite bathroom with a clawfoot tub already filled with steaming water. The bed was enormous, covered in cream-colored linens that looked impossibly soft. Fresh flowers sat on the bedside table, filling the air with the scent of jasmine. "This is—" Alicia trailed off, unable to find the words. "Temporary," Russo said, "until we determine the level of threat you're facing." "And then what?" "Then we reassess." He moved to the window, pulling the heavy curtains closed with a smooth motion that suggested he'd done it 1,000 times before. When he turned back to her, the dying light from the hallway cast shadows across his face, making him look almost otherworldly. "The doctor will be here soon," he said. "Get cleaned up. Rest. Maria will bring you dinner later." "I'm not hungry." "You need to eat. For the baby." Alicia's hand went to her stomach again, an instinctive protective gesture she couldn't seem to stop. "How do you know so much about pregnancy?" Something dark flickered in his eyes. "I had a sister once. She was pregnant when she died." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken grief. "I'm sorry," Alicia whispered. Russo's jaw tightened. "So am I." He turned toward the door, then paused. "Lock this after I leave. Don't open it for anyone except Maria or Dr. Chen. And if you need anything, anything at all, there's an intercom on the bedside table. Press the red button and someone will come." Russo said, "Dante," he corrected. "My name is Dante." Dante. She tested the name on her tongue. It fit him, sharp, elegant, dangerous. "Why did you really come for me today?" He looked back at her, and for the first time she saw something raw in his expression, something that looked almost like regret. "Because I've seen what happens when powerful men destroy innocent lives, and I'm tired of standing by and letting it happen." Then he was gone, the door closing softly behind him. Alicia stood in the middle of the room, her heart pounding, her whole body trembling with exhaustion and adrenaline, and something she couldn't quite name. Slowly she walked to the door and turned the lock, hearing the solid click of the bolt sliding into place. Safe. For the first time in months, she was safe. She didn't know why that made her want to cry. The bath was still hot when she finally lowered herself into it, hissing as the water touched her bruised skin. She sank down until the water covered her shoulders, letting the heat seep into her aching muscles. The bathroom was all white marble and gold fixtures, with a window that looked out over the grounds. Even through the frosted glass, she could see the shapes of trees swaying in the wind. This wasn't her world. This was the world of people like Marcus, people who moved through life with easy confidence, who never worried about rent or bills or whether they could afford to keep a pregnancy. Except Marcus had been a fraud. And Dante was something else entirely. She stayed in the bath until the water cooled, then dragged herself out and wrapped herself in the thick white robe hanging on the back of the door. Maria had left clothes on the bed, soft gray sweatpants and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Alicia made in a month. They were too big, just like Maria had warned, but they were clean and warm, and they smelled like expensive detergent. A knock on the door made her jump. "Ms. Rivers?" A woman's voice, calm and professional. "I'm Dr. Chen. Mr. Russo asked me to examine you." Alessia opened the door to find a petite Asian woman in her 40s, carrying a leather medical bag and wearing an expression of gentle competence. "Please, come in," Alessia said, stepping aside. Dr. Chen set her bag on the bed and pulled out a stethoscope. "Mr. Russo told me you were assaulted earlier today. I need to check for any serious injuries, and I'd like to do a quick ultrasound to make sure the baby is all right. Is that okay with you?" "Yes." Alessia's throat tightened. "Please." The examination was thorough but gentle. Dr. Chen cleaned the cut on Alessia's cheek, checked her ribs for fractures, examined her wrists where the zip ties had cut into the skin. Then she pulled out a small portable ultrasound machine and warmed the gel between her hands before applying it to Alessia's stomach. "This might be a bit early to see much," Dr. Chen said, moving the transducer across Alessia's skin. 7 weeks, you said?" "Yes." "Have you been to an OB yet?" "No, I only found out a few days ago. I was going to make an appointment, but then—" Alessia's voice trailed off. Dr. Chen's expression softened. "Well, let's see what we can find." The screen flickered. At first, Alessia couldn't make sense of what she was seeing, just gray shapes and shadows. Then Dr. Chen pointed to a tiny flicker in the center of the image. "There," she said quietly. "That's the heartbeat." Alessia stopped breathing. Her baby. Her baby's heart beating strong and steady despite everything that had happened today. Despite being thrown into a van. Despite the terror and the violence and the absolute certainty that she was going to die. Her baby had survived. "Everything looks good," Dr. Chen said, her voice warm. "Heart rate is normal. Gestational sac is where it should be. No signs of trauma from the incident." She looked up at Alicia. "You're very lucky." "I know," Alessia whispered, unable to tear her eyes away from the screen. Dr. Chen printed out a grainy black and white image and handed it to her. "Your first ultrasound photo? Congratulations, Miss Rivers." Alessia took the photo with shaking hands. It didn't look like much, just a blob, really, with that tiny flickering spot in the middle. But it was hers, real. Proof that despite everything Marcus had destroyed, he'd left behind something worth protecting. After Dr. Chen left, Alessia sat on the edge of the enormous bed, staring at the ultrasound photo. She should call someone. Her sister, maybe. Or her mother. Someone who could help her make sense of this impossible day. But what would she even say? "Hey, my ex-husband was killed by the Russian mob. I got kidnapped, and now I'm living in a mansion with a crime lord who says I belong to him? They'd think she'd lost her mind. Maybe she had." A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Ms. Rivers?" Maria's voice. "I have dinner for you." Alessia opened the door to find Maria with another tray. This one loaded with soup, fresh bread, and a glass of what looked like sparkling water with lemon. "You don't have to bring me food," Alessia said. "I can come down to the kitchen." Maria smiled, the first real warmth Alessia had seen from her. "Mr. Russo thought you might prefer to eat in your room tonight. It's been a difficult day." That was an understatement. "Thank you, Maria." "Of course." Maria set the tray on the small table by the window. "If you need anything else, just use the intercom. I sleep in the West Wing, but I'll hear you." After Maria left, Alessia forced herself to eat. The soup was some kind of chicken and vegetable blend, rich and warming. The bread was still hot from the oven. She ate mechanically, tasting nothing, her mind too full of everything that had happened. Marcus was dead, shot in the head in Prague by people even more dangerous than the ones who'd taken her. She should feel something about that. Grief, maybe, or relief, or vindication. But all she felt was numb, emptied out, like someone had reached inside her and scooped out all her emotions, leaving nothing but a hollow space. She finished eating and curled up in the massive bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. The sheets were impossibly soft, the mattress perfectly firm. Under any other circumstances, she would have slept like the dead. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her. Somewhere in this mansion was Dante Russo, a man who'd looked at her divorce papers and decided she was worth saving. A man who'd walked into a warehouse full of armed criminals and bought her freedom without hesitation. A man who said she belonged to him like it was a simple fact of nature. She didn't understand him, didn't trust him, didn't know if she was safer here or in more danger than she'd ever been before. But she was alive, and so was her baby. For tonight, that had to be enough. She finally drifted off sometime near dawn, the ultrasound photo clutched in her hand. When she woke, sunlight was streaming through the gaps in the curtains, and someone was knocking on her door. "Miss Rivers?" Maria's voice. "Mr. Russo would like you to join him for breakfast." Alessia sat up, disoriented, her body stiff and aching from yesterday's ordeal. It took her a moment to remember where she was, to piece together the fragmented memories of kidnapping and rescue in this strange gilded cage she'd woken up in. "I'll be down in a few minutes," she called. She found fresh clothes laid out on the chair, jeans that actually fit, a soft blue sweater, undergarments still in their packaging. Maria must have gone shopping early this morning. The thoughtfulness of it made Alessia's throat tight. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, following the sound of voices to a bright, airy dining room that looked out over the gardens. Dante sat at the head of a long mahogany table, reading something on his phone, a cup of coffee at his elbow. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression eased. "You slept," he said. "Eventually." Alessia hesitated in the doorway. "You wanted to see me? I wanted to make sure you were all right." He gestured to the chair beside him. "Please, sit, have some breakfast." Alessia sat, trying not to feel overwhelmed by the spread in front of her. Eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, pastries, yogurt, more food than she could eat in a week. Dante poured her a cup of tea without asking. "Dr. Chen called this morning. She said the baby is fine." "Yes." Alessia wrapped her hands around the warm cup. "Thank you for arranging that." "You don't need to thank me for basic human decency." He set his phone aside, giving her his full attention. "We need to talk about what happens next." "You mean when I can leave?" "I mean how we're going to keep you safe." Dante's tone was patient, like he was explaining something to a child. "The men who took you yesterday work for a crime syndicate with reach across 3 continents. I paid your husband's debt, but that doesn't mean they've forgotten about you. If they think you have information about where Marcus hid the rest of his assets—" "I don't," Alessia interrupted. "I told you I don't know anything." "I believe you. They won't." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Which means you need protection until I can convince them you're not worth the trouble." "And how long will that take?" "As long as it takes." Alessia set her tea down with more force than necessary. "I can't just hide here forever. I have a life, a job, bills to pay." "Your job is gone," Dante said bluntly. "The cafe was destroyed last night. Someone burned it to the ground." The world tilted. "What?" "A message. To me, to you, to anyone who might think about interfering with their business." His expression darkened. "Greta is fine, I made sure of that. But the building is a total loss." Alessia couldn't breathe. "She could have been inside. She could have—" "She wasn't. I had people watching her." Dante's voice gentled. "I'm sorry, Alessia. But this is what I was trying to tell you. These people don't stop. They don't care who gets hurt. And right now, you're a target." "Because of Marcus." Bitterness flooded her mouth. "Because I was stupid enough to marry him. Because you were unlucky enough to fall for a liar." Dante reached across the table and covered her hand with his. His palm was warm, calloused. But that ends now. You're under my protection, and I don't let what's mine be destroyed. There it was again. That possessive claim that should have terrified her, but instead made her feel something dangerously close to safe. I can't pay you back, Alessia said quietly. The 12 million. I'll never be able to repay that. I don't want your money. Then what do you want? Dante was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, intense. I want you to stop looking at me like I'm going to hurt you. I want you to eat properly and take care of yourself and that baby. I want you to understand that for the first time in a very long time, you don't have to do this alone. Tears burned behind Alessia's eyes. I don't know how to do that. Trust someone, I mean. Not after Marcus. Then let me show you. He squeezed her hand gently. Stay here. Let me protect you. And when this is over, when I've made sure you're safe, if you want to leave, I won't stop you. You promise? I promise. Alessia didn't know if she believed him, but looking into his dark eyes, feeling the steady warmth of his hand over hers, she wanted to. Wanted it so badly it scared her. Okay, she whispered. I'll stay. Something fierce and triumphant flashed across Dante's face. Good. He pulled his hand back, leaving hers feeling suddenly cold. But when he smiled at her, a real smile, not the calculated ones she'd seen before, Alessia felt something shift in her chest. Maybe, just maybe, she'd been rescued by the right monster. The days that followed settled into a rhythm Alessia had never experienced before. Structured, protected, almost peaceful in a way that felt both comforting and deeply unsettling. She woke each morning to sunlight filtering through silk curtains, to the smell of fresh coffee drifting up from the kitchen, to the knowledge that somewhere in this sprawling house, Dante was already awake, already working, already watching over her with that quiet, relentless intensity that made her feel simultaneously safe and trapped. She spent her mornings in the library, a room Maria had shown her on the second day. It was the kind of space she'd only seen in movies. Floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound books, a fireplace that actually worked, deep armchairs positioned by the windows overlooking the grounds. She'd curl up with a novel and try to lose herself in other people's stories, anything to avoid thinking too hard about her own. But the truth kept creeping back in, persistent as a heartbeat. She was pregnant. Marcus was dead. And she was living under the protection of a man who operated in shadows, whose very name made hardened criminals go pale. On the fourth morning, she found Dante in his study, standing by the window with his phone pressed to his ear, speaking in rapid Italian. He looked different in the morning light, younger somehow, the harsh lines of his face softened. He was in shirt sleeves, the cuffs rolled up to reveal forearms corded with muscle and marked with faded scars. He glanced up when she appeared in the doorway and held up one finger, finishing his conversation with a few clipped words before ending the call. Alessia. He set the phone on his desk. Is everything all right? I need to ask you something, she said, stepping into the room. And I need you to tell me the truth. Always. She didn't know if she believed that, but she pressed on anyway. What exactly do you do? I know you're not a businessman, not the legitimate kind anyway. Dante's expression didn't change. I manage certain interests in this city. Some are legal, many are not. What kind of interests? Import, export, real estate, security consulting. He paused. And other ventures that don't appear on tax documents. You're a criminal, Alessia said flatly. I'm a businessman who operates outside the boundaries of conventional law, Dante corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Yes. He moved away from the window, circling around his desk to lean against it, arms crossed over his chest. I don't deal in drugs. I don't traffic people. I don't prey on the vulnerable. What I do is provide services to people who need things done quietly, efficiently, and without the messiness of legal channels. That's a very sanitized way of describing organized crime. Perhaps. One corner of his mouth lifted. But it's also the truth. I'm not a good man, Alessia. I won't pretend to be. But I have lines I don't cross. Rules I follow. And one of those rules is that innocent people don't get caught in the crossfire of other people's wars. Is that what I am to you? Crossfire? No. His voice dropped, went soft. You're something else entirely. The air between them felt charged, electric. Alicia's heart kicked up, her palms suddenly damp. What does that mean? Dante studied her for a long moment, those dark eyes seeing straight through her. It means I should have walked away when I saw your name on those papers. It means I should have let someone else handle Marcus's mess. But I didn't. And now you're here. And I find myself caring about what happens to you more than is wise or strategic or remotely sensible. Alicia's breath caught. Dante, you asked for the truth, he said. That's it. Make of it what you will. Before she could respond, his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and his expression shuddered, all that raw honesty disappearing behind his usual mask of control. I need to take this. We'll talk later. It was a dismissal. Alicia recognized it for what it was and left, her mind spinning with everything he'd just admitted. He cared about her, this dangerous, powerful man who could have anyone, who probably had women throwing themselves at him constantly, cared about her. The pregnant, broke, freshly divorced mess of a woman he'd pulled out of a warehouse. It didn't make sense. Nothing about this made sense. She found Maria in the kitchen, preparing what looked like enough food to feed an army. Can I help? Alicia asked. Maria looked up, surprise flickering across her face. You don't need to do that, Miss Rivers. Please, I need something to do with my hands. Alicia moved to the sink and started washing the vegetables Maria had laid out. And call me Alicia. Miss Rivers makes me feel like I'm at a job interview. A smile tugged at Maria's lips. All right then, Alicia. You can chop those carrots if you'd like. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythmic sound of knife against cutting board oddly soothing. Finally, Maria spoke. You're good for him, you know. Alicia nearly dropped the knife. What? Mr. Russo, Dante. Maria kept her eyes on the dough she was kneading. I've worked for him for 8 years. I've seen him in business mode, in combat mode, in shutdown mode, but I've never seen him the way he is with you. I don't understand what you mean. He smiles, Maria said simply. Real smiles, not the calculated ones he uses to put people at ease or unsettle them. And he worries. He called Dr. Chen 3 times yesterday to make sure you were eating enough and getting proper rest. He rearranged his entire schedule so he could be here in the mornings when you wake up. Alicia's hands stilled. He did? He did. Maria looked up, her expression gentle. I know the situation is strange. I know you didn't ask for any of this, but I've seen enough in my life to recognize something real when I see it. And whatever is happening between you two, it's real. I'm pregnant with another man's baby, Alicia said quietly. What kind of man wants that? The kind who sees beyond circumstances to the person underneath. Maria shaped the dough into a ball and covered it with a cloth. My husband used to say that real strength isn't in taking what you want, it's in protecting what matters. Dante is one of the strongest men I've ever known, and you matter to him. Alicia didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to process the idea that she might matter to someone like Dante Russo, someone who moved through the world with such absolute certainty, such unshakable confidence. The afternoon brought an unexpected visitor. Alicia was in the library trying to focus on a book she'd read 3 times already when Maria appeared in the doorway looking slightly flustered. Alicia, Dante's mother is here. She'd like to meet you. Alicia's stomach dropped. His mother? Isabella Russo. She's formidable. Maria's expression softened, but kind. Don't let her intimidate you. Too late for that. Alicia followed Maria to the sitting room, where a woman who could only be described as regal sat on the cream-colored sofa, teacup balanced perfectly in her hand. She was probably in her early 60s, with silver-streaked dark hair, swept back in an elegant chignon, and the same sharp, assessing eyes as her son. Mrs. Russo, Alicia said, suddenly very aware of her borrowed clothes and bare feet. It's nice to meet you. Isabella set down her teacup and stood, moving with the kind of grace that came from years of practice. Alicia Rivers, the woman who has my son behaving like a lovesick teenager. Her voice carried a trace of an Italian accent, warm and rich. Come here, child. Let me look at you. Alicia approached cautiously. Isabella took both her hands, studying her face with an intensity that made Alicia want to squirm. You've been hurt, Isabella said, her thumb brushing gently over the fading bruise on Alicia's cheek. My son told me what happened. I'm sorry you went through that. Thank you, Alessia managed. Sit. Isabella gestured to the sofa. We need to talk. They sat, and Maria brought fresh tea before disappearing discreetly. Alessia wrapped her hands around the cup, needing something to hold on to. My son doesn't bring women to this house, Isabella said without preamble. In all the years he's owned it, you're the first. Do you know what that means? That I'm a charity case? The words came out more bitter than Alessia intended. Isabella laughed, a rich, genuine sound. Oh, I like you. No, child. It means you're important. Dante doesn't let people into his private spaces. This house is his sanctuary, the one place he can be himself without the mask he wears for the world. And he brought you here. He brought me here because I was in danger. He could have put you in a safe house, a hotel, an apartment under guard. Instead, he brought you home. Isabella's gaze was piercing. Why do you think that is? Alessia shook her head, unable to voice the possibility that had been growing in her mind for days. You're pregnant, Isabella said gently. Dante told me, with your ex-husband's child. Yes. Alessia's hand went instinctively to her stomach. I know that complicates things. I know it's not ideal. Ideal? Isabella set down her tea with a soft clink. Let me tell you something about my son. When he was 16, his sister Sophia was killed. She was pregnant, engaged to a man who swore he loved her. But when she got caught up in some business between rival families, that man ran. He left her to die alone. Alessia's breath caught. Dante found her, Isabella continued, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. He held her while she bled out in an alley, promising her that he would make sure the baby, if it survived, would never want for anything. But it was too late. We lost them both. I'm so sorry, Alessia whispered. My son swore that day that he would never let another pregnant woman be abandoned, be destroyed by the cowardice of weak men. He built his empire on that promise. So when he sees you, carrying a child, left behind by someone who should have protected you, do you really think he could walk away? Understanding crashed over Alessia like a wave. He's trying to save her, his sister. In a way, yes. Isabella reached over and squeezed Alessia's hand. But it's more than that. I see the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. I hear it in his voice when he speaks your name. This isn't just about redemption, child. This is about you. I don't know how to do this, Alessia admitted, her voice breaking. I don't know how to trust someone again, not after Marcus. Then don't trust him yet, Isabella said pragmatically. Watch him. See what he does, not what he says. My son is many things, but he's never been a liar. If he says he'll protect you, he will. If he says you matter to him, you do. Give him the chance to prove it. And if I can't, then you leave. No one will stop you. Isabella's expression softened. But I don't think you want to leave. I think you're scared of what might happen if you stay. She was right. Alessia knew she was right. The terror wasn't in being trapped here. It was in what she might feel if she let herself believe this was real. After Isabella left, Alessia wandered through the house in a daze. She found herself in the conservatory, a glass-enclosed room filled with plants and afternoon light. She sank onto a wicker chair and pulled out the ultrasound photo she'd been carrying in her pocket, studying that tiny flicker of life. She's beautiful. Alessia jumped. Dante stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. You can't possibly tell that from this blob, Alessia said, but she was smiling. I can tell. He moved into the room, settling onto the chair beside hers. My mother told me about your conversation. She's very direct. It's a family trait. He glanced at the photo in her hand. She was right, you know, about why I brought you here. Because of your sister. Partly. He was quiet for a moment. But also because when I saw you on those courthouse steps, looking so lost and so determined at the same time, something in me shifted. I've spent 15 years building walls, Alessia, keeping everyone at a distance. And then you literally crashed into my life and somehow got past every single defense I've ever built. I don't want to be a replacement for someone you lost, Alessia said softly. You're not. Dante turned to face her fully. You're entirely your own person. Stubborn, brave, frustrating as hell when you refuse to let me help you. and I find myself thinking about you at the most inconvenient times, wondering if you're eating enough, if you're sleeping well, if you're happy here, or if you're just tolerating it until you can escape." "I don't want to escape," Alicia admitted. "No?" "No, that's what terrifies me." She met his gaze. "I've been here less than a week, and already this feels more like home than anywhere I've been in years. You barely know me, and you've done more for me than my own husband did in 2 years of marriage. It doesn't make sense, Dante. None of this makes sense." "Maybe it doesn't have to." He reached over and took the ultrasound photo from her hand, studying it with surprising gentleness. "Can I tell you something?" "Yes?" "When I found out you were pregnant, my first thought wasn't that it complicated things. It was that I'd make sure this child had everything my sister's baby never got to have. Safety, protection, a father who wouldn't run when things got difficult." Alicia's heart stuttered. "You're talking about raising someone else's child." "I'm talking about raising your child, if you'll let me." He looked up, and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly undid her. "I know it's too soon. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I'm asking you to consider it. Not now, when you're ready. If you're ever ready. The possibility of us becoming something more than protector and protected." "You want to be this baby's father," Alicia said slowly, testing the words. "I want to be in your life. Both of your lives." He handed the photo back carefully. "Marcus forfeited his rights the moment he left you to face his consequences alone. If you choose to stay, this child will bear my name, my protection, my love. Not out of obligation, not to replace what I lost, but because I choose you, both of you." Tears blurred Alicia's vision. "What if I'm not ready for that? What if I can't, then I wait?" Dante's voice was steady, certain. "I'm a patient man, Alicia, and you're worth waiting for." Something cracked open in her chest, some barrier she'd built after Marcus, some wall she'd thought was permanent. She found herself leaning forward, reaching for him, needing to feel something solid and real. Dante pulled her into his arms without hesitation, holding her while she cried against his chest, his hand stroking her hair with surprising tenderness. He didn't tell her it would be okay. He didn't make promises he couldn't keep. He just held her, solid and unwavering, while she fell apart. When she finally pulled back, wiping at her eyes, he brushed his thumb across her cheek, catching a stray tear. "I'm a mess," she said with a watery laugh. "You're human, but—" He smiled, and it transformed his whole face. "And you're allowed to be a mess sometimes. That's what I'm here for." "To catch my mess?" "Among other things." The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. Alicia found herself leaning in, drawn by something she didn't quite understand. Dante went very still, his gaze dropping to her mouth, and she saw desire flare in his eyes before he closed them and pulled back. "Not yet," he said roughly. "Not while you're vulnerable. Not while you're still processing everything that's happened. When we cross that line, and we will if you want to, I need you to be sure. Completely sure." Alicia's cheeks burned. "You're very certain of yourself." "I'm certain of what I feel, and I'm certain that you feel something too, even if you're not ready to admit it yet." He stood, offering her his hand. "Come on, dinner will be ready soon, and Maria will have my head if you don't eat." She let him pull her to her feet, their hands still clasped together. "Dante?" "Yes?" "Thank you for waiting, for not pushing." His smile was soft, almost tender. "You're worth the wait, Alicia, however long it takes." That night, after dinner, Alicia found herself unable to sleep. She wandered downstairs and discovered Dante still in his study, working by lamplight. He looked up when she appeared, concern immediate in his expression. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too many thoughts." She hesitated in the doorway. "Can I ask you something?" "Always." "What happened to the men who killed your sister?" Dante's expression went cold, dangerous. "They're no longer a problem. You killed them. I made sure they could never hurt anyone else." He leaned back in his chair. "Does that frighten you?" "It should," Alicia admitted. "But it doesn't. Is that wrong?" "It's human." He studied her carefully. "My world is violent, Alicia. I won't lie to you about that. I've done things that would make most people run screaming. But everything I do with purpose. I don't take pleasure in violence. I use it when necessary to protect what's mine. And I'm yours, Alessia said quietly. You're yours, Dante corrected. But yes, you're also mine, if you choose to be. She moved into the room, drawn by something she couldn't name. Your mother said I should watch what you do, not what you say. Smart woman. So I'm watching. Alessia stopped in front of his desk. I'm watching you rearrange your schedule to be here when I wake up. I'm watching you triple check with the doctor to make sure I'm healthy. I'm watching you give me space when I need it and step in when I'm drowning. I'm watching you offer me everything and ask for nothing in return. Dante stood slowly. I want something in return. What? A chance. He came around the desk, stopping close enough that she could feel the heat of him. A real chance to show you that not all men are like Marcus, that some of us keep our promises, that you and that baby deserve someone who will burn the world down before letting either of you be hurt again. That's a lot of responsibility to put on someone, Alessia whispered. I know, but I can handle it. His hand came up, cupping her face with a gentleness that made her want to cry. I've been handling impossible things my whole life. Taking care of you won't be a burden, Alicia. It'll be a privilege. She turned her face into his palm, letting herself feel the warmth of his skin, the calluses that spoke of a life lived hard. I don't know how to do this, how to trust again. Then we'll figure it out together. One day at a time, one moment at a time, no pressure, no expectations, just possibility. Alessia looked up at him, this dangerous man with the gentle hands and the fierce protective instinct, and felt something shift in her chest. Family. Her eyes widened. The rest? My family. Her eyes widened. The rest. My brothers, my cousins, the people who've been demanding to meet the woman who's turned me into someone they barely recognize. His smile was wry. They're overwhelming, loud, and occasionally terrifying, but they're family. And if you're going to be part of my life, you should know what you're getting into. And if they hate me, they won't. He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. But if they did, which they won't, it wouldn't matter. You're mine to protect. No one else gets a say in that. There it was again. That possessive claim that should have sent her running, but instead made her feel safe, wanted, chosen. Okay, Alicia said. I'll meet them. Dante's smile could have lit the entire city. Good. Now go get some sleep. You're going to need your strength. She went, but she paused in the doorway, looking back at him. Dante? Yes. I'm glad you didn't walk away. On those courthouse steps. I'm glad you stopped. Something raw and unguarded flashed across his face. So am I, Alessia. So am I. Alessia spent the next morning in a state of barely controlled panic. Meeting Dante's family felt monumental, like crossing some invisible threshold from temporary guest to something more permanent. Maria had laid out clothes again, a soft emerald dress that somehow fit perfectly, making Alessia wonder if Dante had someone figure out her exact measurements while she slept. The thought should have been invasive. Instead, it felt like being seen. She stood in front of the mirror, studying her reflection. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a yellowish shadow, barely visible under the light makeup Maria had tactfully provided. Her hair fell in dark waves past her shoulders, and the dress brought out the green in her hazel eyes. She looked almost like herself again, almost like someone who belonged in a house like this, with a man like Dante. Almost. A knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Alessia? Dante's voice, low and warm. They're here. Are you ready? She wasn't, but she opened the door anyway. Dante stood in the hallway, dressed in dark slacks and a charcoal sweater that made his eyes look even darker. He studied her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. You look beautiful. I look terrified, Alicia corrected. That too. He offered his hand. Come on. I promise they don't bite. Well, Marco might, but only if you insult his cooking. Despite herself, Alessia laughed. She took his hand, letting him lead her downstairs toward the sound of voices and laughter echoing through the house. The noise grew louder as they approached the dining room, multiple conversations overlapping, the clink of glasses, someone arguing passionately in Italian. Last chance to run, Dante murmured. Don't tempt me." He squeezed her hand and pushed open the door. The dining room was full. At least a dozen people crowded around the extended table, and every single one of them turned to look when Dante and Alessia entered. The conversations died mid-sentence. Isabella rose from her seat at the far end of the table, her face breaking into a warm smile. "Finally, we were beginning to think you'd locked her in a tower, Dante." "Don't give him ideas," a man called out. He was younger than Dante, maybe late 20s, with the same dark hair and sharp features. "He's already paranoid enough." "That's Luca," Dante said quietly to Alicia. "My youngest brother. Ignore everything he says." "I'm standing right here," Luca protested. "We know," another man said, this one closer to Dante's age with a scar running through his left eyebrow. "That's the problem." Dante guided Alessia into the room, his hand steady on the small of her back. "Everyone, this is Alessia Rivers. Alessia, this is my family. You've met my mother. The one glaring at Luca is my brother Nico. The instigator is Luca, as mentioned. The woman about to strangle them both is our cousin Valentina." Valentina waved, her dark eyes sparkling with amusement. "Ignore the testosterone. We're actually civilized when we want to be." "Debatable," Nico muttered. Dante continued the introductions, rattling off names and relationships faster than Alicia could process. There were uncles and cousins, family friends who were considered blood, even Maria's daughter Rosa and her husband. The sheer number of people was overwhelming, but something about the chaos felt oddly comforting. This wasn't the cold, distant family she'd imagined. This was loud and warm and real. "Sit, sit," Isabella commanded, gesturing to the empty chairs beside her. "You must be starving. Dante, get her a plate." "I can get my own plate," Alicia said, but Dante was already moving to the sideboard laden with food. "Let him," Valentina said, leaning across the table with a conspiratorial grin. "He's been insufferable all morning, making sure everything was perfect. I've never seen him this wound up over someone." "Valentina," Dante warned. "What? It's true." She turned back to Alessia. "He called me at 6 in the morning to ask if I thought the salmon was too much, or if he should have Maria make chicken instead. 6 in the morning, Alessia." Heat crept up Alessia's neck. "You didn't have to go through all this trouble." "It wasn't trouble," Dante said, setting a plate in front of her with enough food to feed 3 people. "I wanted you to feel welcome." Lucas snorted. "He wanted to show off. There's a difference." "Careful," Nico said mildly. "He might actually kill you this time." "He wouldn't. Mama likes me too much." Isabella pointed her fork at Luca. "Don't test me, boy. I can always make another one." The table erupted in laughter, and Alessia felt some of her tension ease. She picked at her food while conversation flowed around her. Questions directed at her that were curious but not invasive. Stories about Dante as a child that made him scowl and made her smile. Arguments that seemed heated but were clearly born from affection. "So," Valentina said during a lull in conversation, her gaze shrewd, "Dante tells us you're a writer." Alessia blinked. I used to want to be. I studied literature in college, but I never actually—" "She keeps a journal," Dante interjected smoothly. "Beautiful writing. Very observant." Alessia stared at him. "How do you know that?" "You left it on the library table yesterday." "I didn't read it," he added quickly, "but I saw enough to know you have talent." "That's an invasion of privacy." "It's my library." "It's still invasive." Nico laughed. "I like her. She doesn't let you bulldoze her." "No one lets Dante bulldoze them," Isabella said. "They just pretend to and then do what they want anyway. Isn't that right, figlio mio?" Dante's expression was long-suffering. This was a terrible idea. "Best idea you've had in years," Luca countered. "Finally, someone to take you down a peg." The lunch stretched on, course after course appearing from the kitchen. Alessia found herself relaxing despite her earlier nerves, drawn into the warmth and chaos of Dante's family. They asked about her life, her interests, her plans for the baby, and somehow made it feel like genuine curiosity rather than interrogation. When Valentina asked about the pregnancy, Alicia half expected judgment or awkward silence. Instead, the entire table lit up with advice, stories, and offers of help. "You'll want to start thinking about nursery colors soon," Rosa said. "I have catalogs I can send you." "And a good pediatrician," Isabella added. I'll give you Dr. Morrison's number. She delivered all my boys. Don't overwhelm her, Dante said, but he was smiling. Too late, Alicia murmured, but she was smiling too. After lunch, the group migrated to the gardens. The afternoon had turned unexpectedly warm, sunlight filtering through the bare branches of the trees. Alessia found herself walking beside Isabella, while Dante was pulled into conversation with his brothers. You're handling this well, Isabella observed. Most people find us exhausting. I find you overwhelming, Alicia admitted, but in a good way. My family was always so quiet, so controlled. This is different. Different good or different bad? Good. Alessia watched Dante laugh at something Luca said, his whole face transforming. Definitely good. Isabella followed her gaze. He's happier than I've seen him in years. You've done that. I haven't done anything. I've just been here. Sometimes that's everything. Isabella paused by a stone bench, lowering herself onto it with a sigh. Sit with me a moment. Alessia sat, tucking her hands into the pockets of her dress. The garden stretched out before them, all bare earth and dormant plants waiting for spring. I want to tell you something, Isabella said, about Dante, about what he's been through. You don't have to. I do. Isabella's gaze was distant, remembering. After Sophia died, Dante changed. He was always intense, always driven, but he became almost mechanical. He built his empire, eliminated his enemies, secured his power. But he stopped letting people in, stopped believing that caring about someone wouldn't end in loss. Alessia's throat tightened. I can't imagine losing someone like that. It nearly destroyed him. For years, I watched my son exist rather than live. He went through the motions, did what needed to be done, but there was no joy in it, no hope. Isabella turned to look at Alicia. And then he met you, and suddenly he's calling me at midnight to ask about prenatal vitamins. He's researching pregnancy symptoms. He's smiling again. He barely knows me. He knows enough. Isabella reached over and patted Alessia's hand. You remind him that there's more to life than revenge and power. You give him something to protect without the weight of guilt. And whether you realize it or not, you're already letting him in. I'm scared, Alessia admitted, of what happens if this goes wrong, if he realizes I'm not worth all this trouble. My son doesn't do anything he doesn't want to do. If he's chosen to protect you, to care for you, to offer you and your child a future with him, believe him. Trust that he knows his own mind. Before Alessia could respond, Dante appeared beside the bench. Plotting against me? He asked lightly. Always, Isabella said, standing. I'm going to check on dessert. You two take a walk. The roses will bloom soon. I want to show Alessia where we'll plant them. She swept away, leaving Dante and Alessia alone. He offered his hand and Alessia took it without thinking, letting him pull her to her feet. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, following the stone path that wound through the gardens. Dante's hand was warm around hers, solid and reassuring. Your family is wonderful, Alessia said finally. Overwhelming, but wonderful. They like you. I can tell. How? Valentina invited you to girls' night next week. She only does that for people she actually wants to spend time with. He glanced at her. Luca asked if you played poker. That's his version of a friendship offer. And Nico? Nico threatened to break my legs if I hurt you. That's basically his seal of approval. Alessia laughed despite herself. Your family threatens violence very casually. It's a love language. Dante stopped walking, turning to face her. But they're serious about it. You're under their protection now too, not just mine, the whole family. I don't understand why everyone is being so kind to me. Because you're important to me. And what's important to me becomes important to them. His thumb brushed across her knuckles. That's how family works in our world. We protect our own. I'm not yours, Alessia said, but it came out more question than statement. Not yet, Dante agreed. But you could be, if you wanted. The air between them felt charged, electric. Alessia found herself swaying toward him, drawn by something she didn't fully understand. Dante's free hand came up to cup her face, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palm. I'm still scared, she whispered. I know, but I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. His gaze dropped to her mouth. "Can I kiss you, Alicia?" Her breath caught. She should say no. Should keep the distance between them, protect herself from the possibility of more pain. But looking up at him, seeing the raw honesty in his eyes, she couldn't make herself refuse. "Yes," she breathed. Dante kissed her like she was something precious, something that might break if he wasn't careful. His lips were soft against hers, questioning rather than demanding. Alessia's hands came up to grip his sweater, anchoring herself as the world tilted sideways. When they finally pulled apart, Dante rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I've wanted to do that since the courthouse steps. That was less than 2 weeks ago. Longest 2 weeks of my life." He smiled, and it was boyish, almost vulnerable. "You're changing everything, Alessia. My routines, my priorities, the way I think about the future. It should terrify me, but all I feel is grateful that I didn't walk away that day." "Dante," whatever she was going to say was interrupted by Luca's voice calling from the house. "Dante, we have a problem." Dante's expression shuddered immediately, all that softness replaced by cold calculation. "Stay here." "What's wrong?" "Probably nothing, but until I know for sure—" He kissed her forehead quickly. "Stay in the garden. I'll be right back." He strode toward the house, his whole demeanor shifting from tender to dangerous in the space of a heartbeat. Alessia watched him go, her lips still tingling from his kiss, her heart pounding with something that felt dangerously like hope. She wandered deeper into the garden, giving Dante space to handle whatever crisis had arisen. The sun was starting to sink toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. In a few months, she'd be showing. In 6 months, she'd have a baby. The future stretched out before her, uncertain but no longer terrifying, because maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't be facing it alone. She was examining the bare rose bushes when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting Dante, and froze. The man standing on the path wasn't Dante. He was taller, broader, with cold blue eyes and a face she'd seen before, in the warehouse. One of the leather-jacketed men who'd dragged her into the van. "Hello, Alicia," he said, and his smile was all teeth. "Remember me?" She opened her mouth to scream, but he moved faster than she would have thought possible. His hand clamped over her mouth, his other arm wrapping around her waist, pinning her arms. She thrashed, tried to bite, but he was too strong. "Russo thought he could pay us off, and that would be the end of it," the man hissed in her ear. "He was wrong. You're worth more to us as leverage than any amount of money." Terror spiked through her. The baby. She had to protect the baby. She brought her heel down hard on his instep. He grunted, but didn't let go, starting to drag her toward the back wall of the property. Alessia fought with everything she had, fear giving her strength she didn't know she possessed. Then suddenly, he went rigid. "Let her go." Dante's voice, soft and deadly. The man's grip loosened slightly. Alessia wrenched herself free and stumbled forward, gasping. She turned to see Dante standing behind her attacker, a gun pressed to the base of the man's skull. "Russo," the man said carefully. "This isn't what it looks like. It looks like you broke into my home and put your hands on my woman." Dante's expression was cold, empty, nothing like the man who'd kissed her minutes ago. "I believe I made myself clear about the consequences of that. Your bosses sent me. Then they just signed their own death warrants." Dante's finger tightened on the trigger. "Any last words?" "Dante, don't," Alessia said, her voice shaking. "Not here. Not where your family can see." Dante's gaze flicked to her, and something human flickered behind the ice. "Get inside. Now!" "Dante." "Inside, Alessia, please." She ran. She made it to the house just as Nico and Luca burst through the back door, both armed. They took one look at her face and moved past her without a word, heading for the garden. Isabella appeared in the hallway, her expression fierce. "Are you hurt?" "No, Alessia's legs gave out. Isabella caught her, strong despite her age. "Rosa, get Dr. Chen on the phone. Valentina, take Alessia to the sitting room, now." Alessia let herself be guided to a sofa, her whole body shaking. Through the window, she could see shapes moving in the garden. Dante and his brothers. The intruder on his knees. She looked away before she could see what happened next. Dr. Chen arrived within 20 minutes, which should have been impossible, but apparently wasn't when Dante Russo made a phone call. She examined Alessia carefully, checking for injuries, monitoring the baby's heartbeat with her portable ultrasound. "Everything looks fine," Dr. Chen said finally. "No harm done to you or the baby. But you're going to be sore tomorrow. The adrenaline will wear off, and you'll feel everything." "Thank you," Alessia managed. "Doctor." Chen packed up her equipment, then paused. "For what it's worth, you're safe here. Dante won't let anything happen to you." After she left, Alessia sat alone in the sitting room, staring at nothing. She heard Dante's family moving through the house, heard the low murmur of urgent conversations, but no one came to check on her until the door finally opened and Dante walked in. He looked tired. Older somehow, the lines around his eyes more pronounced. There was blood on his knuckles. "Is he dead?" Alessia asked. "No?" Dante sat down beside her, careful not to touch her. "But he won't be a problem anymore. None of them will." "What does that mean?" "It means I just declared war on the syndicate that's been targeting you. It means I'm making it very clear that touching you is a death sentence." He looked at her finally, and his eyes were haunted. "I'm sorry, this is my fault. I should have had better security. I should have anticipated—" "You can't control everything," Alessia interrupted. "I can control this. I should have." His jaw clenched. "When I saw him with his hands on you, when I realized how close I came to losing you—" "But you didn't. I'm fine. The baby's fine." "This time." Dante's voice was rough. "But there will be others, Alessia. As long as you're connected to me, there will always be people who see you as a weakness, a target, a way to get to me." Understanding crashed over her. "You're going to push me away. I'm trying to protect you." "By what? Sending me away?" Anger flared, hot and bright, burning through the fear. "You told me I was safe here. You told me you wouldn't let anything happen to me. Was that all a lie?" "Of course not. Then don't you dare use this as an excuse to run." Alessia stood, her hands clenched into fists. "I've had enough of men who run when things get hard. If you want me to leave, if you've changed your mind about me, then say so. But don't hide behind some noble sacrifice." Dante stared at her, something fierce and almost proud flickering across his face. "You think I want you to leave?" "I think you're scared. Just like me." "I'm terrified," Dante admitted, "because for the first time in 15 years I have something to lose. Someone I care about more than my own survival. And that makes me vulnerable in ways I haven't been since Sophia died." "So what do we do?" Alessia asked, her voice breaking. Dante stood, crossing the distance between them in 2 strides. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight enough that she could feel his heart pounding against her cheek. "We fight. Together. We make them understand that you're not a weakness. You're a line they don't cross. We build something strong enough that our enemies know attacking you means burning their entire world to the ground." "That's not exactly a peaceful solution." "Peace isn't an option in my world, Alessia. But protection is. Safety is. A future where you and that baby can thrive without constantly looking over your shoulders." He pulled back enough to look at her. "I'm not giving up on this. On us. Not unless you tell me to." "I'm not telling you to," Alessia said fiercely. "I'm telling you to fight. For me, for the baby, for whatever this is between us. I'm telling you that I'm choosing to stay, and that means you don't get to make decisions about my safety without me." Dante's smile was slow, dangerous, and entirely genuine. "You're going to be trouble, aren't you?" "Probably." "Good." He kissed her again, deeper this time, less gentle. When he pulled back, his eyes were blazing. "Then let's give them something to be afraid of." The war Dante promised came swift and brutal. Within 48 hours of the garden attack, 3 of the syndicate's warehouses went up in flames. Their primary money laundering operation was raided by federal agents who somehow received detailed anonymous tips. Key players started disappearing, not killed, Dante assured her, but relocated to places where they'd never pose a threat again. Alessia watched it unfold from the safety of Dante's estate, which had transformed overnight into a fortress. Armed guards patrolled the grounds. Security cameras covered every angle. Nico moved into one of the guest houses, and Luca took up residence in the West Wing. The family had circled their wagons, and she stood at the center of their protection. She should have been terrified. Instead, she felt strangely calm, like the eye of a hurricane, because for the first time in her life, she wasn't facing danger alone. 2 weeks after the attack, Dante found her in the library, curled up in her favorite chair with a book she wasn't actually reading. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his shirt rumpled like he'd been wearing it for days. "It's done," he said without preamble. Alicia set down her book. "What's done?" "The syndicate. Their leadership agreed to terms this morning." He crossed to the window, staring out at the grounds. "You're no longer a target. They've officially declared you untouchable, along with anyone connected to you." "How did you manage that?" "I made them understand that the cost of coming after you would always exceed any potential gain." His voice was flat, emotionless. "I showed them what happens when someone threatens what's mine." Alessia stood, moving to stand beside him. "You look like you haven't slept in days." "I haven't." He turned to face her, and the vulnerability in his eyes nearly undid her. "I couldn't, not until I knew you were safe. Really safe. Not just for today or tomorrow, but permanently." "Dante, I need you to understand something," he interrupted. "What I did, what I'm capable of doing, it's not pretty, it's not civilized. I've built my entire life on violence and intimidation and the willingness to go further than anyone else. And I won't apologize for that, because it's what kept you alive." Alessia reached up and cupped his face, forcing him to look at her. "I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm asking you to come to bed and sleep for 12 hours before you collapse." Something that might have been a laugh escaped him. "You're very bossy for someone who's supposed to be under my protection. Someone has to take care of you while you're busy taking care of everyone else." She took his hand. "Come on, doctor's orders." "Dr. Chen didn't say that. I'm invoking pregnant woman privilege. It's in the handbook." This time he did laugh, genuine and warm. He let her lead him upstairs to his bedroom, a room she'd never been in before. It was surprisingly simple, all dark wood and clean lines, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. The bed was massive, covered in charcoal gray linens that looked impossibly soft. "I'll leave you to rest," Alessia said, starting to back toward the door. Dante caught her hand. "Stay. Dante, please, I sleep better when you're near." He looked almost embarrassed by the admission. "I know that sounds insane, but it's true." Alessia's heart squeezed. "Okay, but just until you fall asleep." She settled into the armchair by the window, while Dante collapsed onto the bed, fully clothed. He was asleep within minutes, his breathing evening out, the tension finally draining from his face. Alessia watched him for a while, this dangerous man who'd turned his world upside down to protect her, and felt something shift inside her chest. She loved him. The realization should have terrified her. Instead, it felt inevitable, like gravity. She'd been falling since the courthouse steps, since he'd looked at her with those dark eyes and decided she was worth saving. Every moment since had just been her catching up to what her heart already knew. She loved Dante Russo, and somehow, impossibly, he loved her back. She must have fallen asleep in the chair because when she woke, evening light was slanting through the windows and someone had draped a blanket over her. Dante was awake, propped up on pillows, watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "How long have you been awake?" she asked, her voice rough from sleep. "An hour, maybe more." He smiled. "You snore, did you know that?" "I do not." "You absolutely do. It's adorable." Alessia threw the blanket at him. "I'm leaving." "Don't." He caught her hand before she could stand. "Stay. Talk to me. I feel like we haven't really talked in weeks." She settled back into the chair, tucking her feet underneath her. "What do you want to talk about?" "The baby." He said it carefully, like he was testing the waters. "Have you thought about names?" "Not really. It still doesn't feel entirely real yet. She pressed her hand to her stomach, which was just starting to show a small curve. "I'm almost 12 weeks now. Dr. Chen says I can find out the sex soon if I want to." "Do you want to?" "I don't know. Part of me wants to be surprised, but another part wants to know so I can start planning." She looked at him. "What do you think?" "I think it's your choice. Either way, I'm here for it." He paused. "Can I ask you something?" "Always. What would you have done? If none of this had happened, if Marcus hadn't stolen that money, if you hadn't been taken, if we'd never met, what was your plan?" Alicia was quiet for a moment, thinking. I probably would have kept the pregnancy secret as long as possible, saved every penny I could from the cafe, found the cheapest prenatal care available, had the baby alone and figured out how to raise it while working 2 jobs. She smiled sadly. It wouldn't have been a good life, but it would have been mine, and I would have done everything I could to make sure my child never felt unwanted. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Dante said quietly. I was desperate. There's a difference. No. Desperate people give up. You were ready to fight for your child before it even existed. That's not desperation. That's love. Tears prickled behind Alicia's eyes. I don't want my baby to grow up knowing their father didn't want them. They won't. Dante sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. Because their father will be someone who chose them, who wanted them from the beginning, who will love them not because of biology, but because of choice. You're talking about yourself. I'm talking about us. He stood and crossed to her chair, kneeling in front of her so they were eye level. I want to raise this child with you, Alessia. I want to be there for every doctor's appointment, every milestone, every moment. I want to teach them to be strong and brave and kind. I want to give them the kind of childhood Sophia's baby never got to have. That's a lot of responsibility. I know, and I'm ready for it. He took both her hands. I'm ready for you, for this, for a life that's about more than power and revenge. You've shown me there's something better, something worth protecting that isn't built on fear. Alessia's vision blurred with tears. I love you. The words hung in the air between them, huge and terrifying and true. Dante's eyes widened. What? I love you, she repeated, stronger this time. I know it's too soon and probably crazy, and I should be more careful with my heart, but I can't help it. I love the way you make me feel safe. I love your terrible overprotective instincts and your ridiculous family and the way you look at me like I'm something precious. I love you, Dante Russo, and I'm tired of being afraid to say it. Dante pulled her out of the chair and into his arms in one smooth motion, kissing her like she was oxygen and he'd been drowning. When they finally broke apart, he was smiling so widely it transformed his entire face. I love you too, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I've loved you since you looked at me on those courthouse steps like you were ready to fight the world with your bare hands. I've loved you through every moment of this mess, and I'll love you for every moment that comes after. That's a long time, Alessia said, but she was smiling through her tears. Good thing I'm patient. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the corner of her mouth. Marry me. Alessia's heart stopped. What? Marry me. Not because you need protection, or because it's practical, or because of the baby. Marry me because you love me, and I love you, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving that not all men are like Marcus Chen. Dante, that's insane. We've known each other for less than a month. I don't care. I've never been more certain of anything. His hands framed her face, gentle despite their strength. I know it's fast. I know it's probably crazy, but I also know that I want to wake up next to you every morning. I want to be there when that baby takes their first steps. I want to build a life with you that has nothing to do with the circumstances that brought us together, and everything to do with the choice we're making right now. Alicia searched his face, looking for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign that this was just another protective gesture. But all she saw was love, raw and honest and absolutely certain. Ask me again in a month, she said finally, when we've had time to breathe, when things aren't so chaotic, when I can be sure you're not just caught up in the moment. Disappointment flickered across his face, but he nodded. Okay, 1 month. But my answer isn't going to change, Alessia. We'll see. But deep down, she already knew hers wouldn't either. The next 4 weeks passed in a blur of normalcy that felt almost surreal after everything that had happened. Alessia went to her 12-week appointment with Dr. Chen, with Dante by her side, holding her hand while they watched their baby move on the ultrasound screen. She started showing enough that Maria had to take her shopping for maternity clothes, which turned into a full-day expedition with Valentina and Rosa that left Alessia exhausted and laughing. She met more of Dante's business associates, learning to navigate the delicate balance of his world, knowing when to speak and when to stay silent, understanding that sometimes the most dangerous people came wrapped in expensive suits and practiced smiles. She learned that Dante's empire wasn't just about intimidation and violence. He owned legitimate businesses too, employed hundreds of people, contributed to the community in ways that would never make the papers. He was complicated, contradictory, capable of both tremendous gentleness and absolute brutality. And she loved every facet of him. One evening, exactly 1 month after his proposal, Dante took her to the conservatory. It had been transformed. Fairy lights strung through the plants, candles flickering on every surface, soft music playing from hidden speakers. In the center of it all stood Isabella, Nico, Luca, Valentina, and what looked like half of Dante's extended family. "What is this?" Alessia asked. Dante led her to the center of the room, where a small clearing had been made among the plants. He turned to face her, and she saw him take a deep breath, steadying himself. "1 month ago, I asked you to marry me," he said. "You told me to ask again when things were calmer, when we'd had time to think, when you could be sure I wasn't just reacting to crisis." He pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "It's been 1 month, Alessia. Things are calmer. I've had time to think, and I'm more certain than I was that day." He dropped to one knee, and Alessia's hands flew to her mouth. "I'm not a good man," Dante continued. "I've done things that would horrify you if you knew the details. I've built my life on foundations most people would find morally questionable at best. But you make me want to be better. You make me want to build something beautiful instead of just protecting what I've taken. You and that baby, you're my chance at redemption, at a life that means something beyond power and control." He opened the box, revealing a ring that took her breath away. A simple platinum band with a single diamond that caught the candlelight and threw rainbows across the walls. "So I'm asking you again, Alicia Rivers. Will you marry me? Will you let me be a father to your child? Will you build a life with me that's messy and complicated and absolutely worth fighting for?" Alessia looked down at him, this man who'd saved her life and stolen her heart, and felt certainty settle into her bones like coming home. "Yes," she said, and the word came out half laugh, half sob. "Yes, I'll marry you." The room erupted in cheers. Dante surged to his feet, sliding the ring onto her finger before pulling her into a kiss that made her forget they had an audience. When they finally broke apart, his family was surrounding them, offering congratulations and hugs, and already arguing about wedding details. "Small ceremony," Dante said firmly, his arm wrapped around Alessia's waist. "Just family." "In the garden," Isabella added, "when the roses bloom." "That's months away," Luca protested. "You'll be huge by then," Alessia laughed. "Thanks for that." "He means it affectionately," Valentina said, swatting Luca's arm. "But he's not wrong. Maybe sooner rather than later." Dante looked at Alicia. "What do you want?" She thought about it, looking around at the family that had claimed her as their own, at the man who'd promised her safety and given her so much more. "Soon," she decided, "before the baby comes. I want to be your wife when our daughter is born." "Daughter?" Dante's eyes widened. "You found out? Dr. Chen called this morning. I was going to tell you tonight." She smiled, pressing her hand to her growing belly. "We're having a girl." The look on Dante's face was something Alicia would remember for the rest of her life. Pure, unfiltered joy, mixed with something that looked like awe. He pulled her close, burying his face in her hair. "A daughter," he whispered. "We're having a daughter." "We are," Alicia confirmed, and felt the truth of those words settle around them like a promise. They were married 3 weeks later in the garden, just as the first roses began to bloom. Alessia wore a simple ivory dress that accommodated her growing belly, her hair woven with flowers that Maria had cultivated specifically for the occasion. Dante wore a dark suit and couldn't stop smiling, his usual control completely shattered by happiness. The ceremony was brief, officiated by a family friend who kept it simple and heartfelt. When Dante slipped the wedding band onto Alessia's finger, a perfect match to her engagement ring, his hand was shaking. "I, Dante Russo, take you, Alessia Rivers, to be my wife," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "I promise to protect you and the child you carry. I promise to love you in the light and in the darkness. I promise to choose you every single day for the rest of my life." Alessia's own vows came from her heart. "I, Alessia Rivers, take you, Dante Russo, to be my husband. I promise to trust you when fear tells me not to. I promise to build a life with you that's worth all the chaos that brought us together. I promise to love you not in spite of who you are, but because of it. Every complicated, contradictory, beautiful part of you. When the officiant pronounced them married, Dante kissed her like they were the only two people in the world. And maybe, in that moment, they were. The reception was loud and joyful, full of food and wine and dancing. Alessia found herself swept up in it all, passed from one family member to another, receiving advice and blessings, and more love than she knew what to do with. Later, when the party had wound down and most of the guests had gone home, she and Dante stood together in the garden, watching the stars emerge one by one. "Happy?" Dante asked, his arm around her shoulders. "Terrified," Alessia admitted. "But yes, happy. What are you terrified of?" "That I'll wake up and this will all be a dream. That something will go wrong. That I'll mess up this perfect thing we've built." Dante turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her arms. "Nothing about this is perfect, Alicia. We're messy and complicated and we're figuring it out as we go. But we're doing it together, and that's what matters. You're very wise for a crime lord. I have my moments." He kissed her forehead. "Come on, let's go to bed. You're exhausted and the baby needs rest." "The baby is fine. She's been kicking up a storm all day. She's excited. Her mother just got married to someone who loves her more than life itself." Dante's hand settled on Alicia's belly, and right on cue, their daughter kicked against his palm. His face lit up. "She knows my voice." "She should. You talk to her constantly." "I want her to know she's loved, right from the start." Alicia covered his hand with hers, feeling their daughter move beneath their joined palms. "She will. We'll make sure of it." The pregnancy progressed beautifully. Alicia bloomed under Dante's careful attention and his family's unwavering support. She took up writing again, filling journal after journal with observations about her new life, stories about the family she'd married into, dreams for the future she was building. Dante transformed one of the guest rooms into a nursery, painting it himself in soft lavender and cream. Isabella contributed a rocking chair that had been in the family for generations. Valentina threw a baby shower that was equal parts elegant and chaotic. Even Nico, stoic and intimidating, showed up one day with a hand-carved crib that had taken him months to make. 20 weeks became 30. 30 became 35. Before Alicia knew it, she was 9 months pregnant, waddling through the house with swollen ankles and a permanent backache, counting down the days until she could see her daughter's face. She went into labor on a sunny morning in late spring. Dante, who'd been calm through criminal negotiations and violent confrontations, turned into an absolute mess. He hovered, he fretted, he called Dr. Chen so many times the doctor threatened to put him in a separate room. "Dante," Alessia gasped between contractions, "you need to breathe." "I'm breathing." "You breathe." "I am breathing. That's why I can tell you that you're hyperventilating." Isabella, who'd arrived within minutes of Dante's panicked phone call, took her son by the shoulders. "Go get some air. Walk the grounds. Come back when you can be helpful instead of hovering like an anxious ghost." "I'm not leaving her." "Go," Alessia said firmly. "Your mother will stay with me. You're making me nervous." He went, though he looked like it physically pained him to do so. Isabella settled into the chair beside the bed, taking Alessia's hand. He was like this when Sophia went into labor. Couldn't stand not being able to fix everything. "I remember you telling me about her." Alessia breathed through another contraction. "I wish I could have met her. She would have loved you, would have recognized a kindred spirit, someone strong enough to love a Russo man." Isabella squeezed her hand. She'd be happy knowing her brother finally found peace. The labor was long and exhausting. Dante returned after 20 minutes, calmer but no less worried, and refused to leave Alessia's side again. He held her hand through every contraction, wiped sweat from her forehead, whispered encouragement when she was sure she couldn't do it anymore. And then, as the sun was setting and painting the room in shades of gold, their daughter was born. She came into the world screaming, red-faced and furious, with a shock of dark hair and her father's eyes. Dr. Chen cleaned her quickly and placed her on Alessia's chest, and the moment their daughter's skin touched hers, everything else fell away. She's perfect, Alicia whispered, tears streaming down her face. She's beautiful, Dante agreed, his voice thick with emotion. She looks like you. She has your eyes. Then she'll be able to intimidate people from infancy. Excellent. But his hands were shaking as he touched their daughter's tiny head, his expression full of wonder. Dr. Chen finished the necessary procedures and quietly left them alone. Dante settled onto the bed beside Alessia, his arm around her shoulders, both of them staring at the tiny miracle in her arms. "Have you thought about names?" Alessia asked. "I was thinking Sophia," Dante said quietly, "if you're comfortable with it, to honor my sister." Alessia looked down at their daughter, who'd stopped crying and was now looking around with wide, curious eyes. Sophia rose. "For your sister and your mother's garden." "It's perfect." Dante leaned down and pressed a kiss to their daughter's forehead. "Welcome to the world, Sophia Rose Russo. You have no idea how loved you already are." Sophia made a small sound, her tiny hand curling around Dante's finger with surprising strength. Alessia watched her husband's face transform as he looked at their daughter, saw all his careful control crumble in the face of absolute, overwhelming love. "I never thought I'd have this," he said. "A family, a daughter, someone to protect who actually wants my protection. You have it now. We both do." Alessia leaned her head against his shoulder. "We built something beautiful out of all that chaos." "We did." He kissed her temple. "Thank you for trusting me, for choosing me, for giving me a second chance at being someone worth knowing. You were always worth knowing. I just had to look past the intimidating exterior." "How's that working out for you?" Alessia smiled, exhausted and deliriously happy. "Pretty well, actually." The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and endless diaper changes and the kind of exhaustion Alessia had never experienced. But they were also filled with moments of perfect joy. Sophia's first smile, the way she quieted immediately when Dante spoke to her, the sight of this powerful, dangerous man holding their tiny daughter like she was made of spun glass. Isabella visited daily, teaching Alicia things about motherhood she'd never learned from books. Valentina brought meals and gossip and the promise of babysitting whenever they needed it. Even Nico, stern and serious, turned soft when Sophia grabbed his finger and refused to let go. One night, when Sophia was 3 weeks old, Alessia found Dante in the nursery, holding their daughter against his chest while he paced slowly around the room. Sophia was fast asleep, her tiny hand fisted in Dante's shirt, her breathing even and peaceful. "She won't go down in the crib," Dante said quietly. "She keeps waking up crying, but if I hold her, she sleeps." "You're going to spoil her," Alessia said, but she was smiling. "Good. She deserves to be spoiled." He looked at Alessia. "Did you know Marcus sent you an email before he died?" Alessia's smile faded. "What?" "It was in your old account. One of my people found it while they were cleaning up loose ends. Do you want to know what it said?" "I don't know, do I?" Dante was quiet for a moment, still swaying with Sophia. He said he was sorry, that he'd made terrible choices and destroyed something good, that if he could go back, he'd do everything differently, but that he knew it was too late, and he hoped you'd find someone who deserved you. Tears pricked Alessia's eyes. "He said that?" "He did. He also said he hoped the baby, he'd found out about the pregnancy somehow, would have a better father than he could ever be." Dante looked down at Sophia. He was right about that, at least. Alessia crossed the room and wrapped her arms around both of them. Her family. Her second chance at happiness. "He gave me something good, even if he didn't mean to. He gave me her, and losing him led me to you." "I used to hate him," Dante admitted, "for being careless with you, for leaving you vulnerable. But I can't hate him anymore, because without his mistakes, I never would have found you on those courthouse steps." "Funny how life works out," Alicia murmured. "Hilarious." But he was smiling as he said it. Sophia stirred, making small sounds of protest. Dante resumed his swaying, humming something in Italian that Alicia didn't recognize. Within moments, their daughter was asleep again, peaceful and safe. "You're going to be an amazing father," Alicia said. "I'm going to try. That's all I can promise." He looked at her, and his eyes were soft with love. "Thank you for letting me be here, for choosing me to raise her. I know she's not mine by blood, She's yours in every way that matters, Alessia interrupted. Biology doesn't make a father. Love does. Choice does. Being there for every moment does. And you've been here since before she was born. I'll be here for every moment after, too, Dante promised. First steps, first words, first heartbreak, all of it. Even the teenage years? Especially the teenage years. Someone's going to have to intimidate her future dates. Alessia laughed quietly. She's 3 weeks old. Can we maybe wait a bit before planning the intimidation strategy? Never too early to prepare. But he was grinning, and Alessia felt her heart swell with love for this man who'd saved her life and given her a future she'd never dared to dream of. 6 months later, they held a small ceremony in the garden, just family, to officially finalize Dante's adoption of Sophia. The legal proceedings had been straightforward, helped along by lawyers who knew how to navigate the system efficiently. But this ceremony was for them, a chance to make promises in front of the people they loved. Dante stood in the same spot where they'd been married, holding Sophia in his arms. She was bigger now, more alert, reaching for everything with chubby hands and babbling constantly in a language only she understood. I, Dante Russo, claim Sophia Rose as my daughter, he said, his voice steady and sure. I promise to protect her, to guide her, to love her unconditionally for all the days of my life. I promise to teach her to be strong and brave and kind. I promise to be worthy of the gift I've been given, the chance to be her father. Alessia's eyes were already wet with tears. Isabella was openly crying. Even Nico looked suspiciously emotional. Sophia, oblivious to the significance of the moment, grabbed Dante's nose and laughed. I think that's her version of I accept, Luca said, and everyone laughed. Afterward, they celebrated with cake and champagne and the kind of joy that only comes from knowing you've fought for something and won. Alicia watched Dante with Sophia, saw the absolute adoration on his face, and knew with certainty that they'd made the right choice. That night, after Sophia was asleep and the house was quiet, Alessia and Dante stood on their bedroom balcony, looking out over the grounds. The garden was in full bloom now, roses and jasmine filling the air with sweetness. Do you ever regret it? Dante asked. Staying here, marrying me, building this life? Never, Alessia said without hesitation. Do you? Not for a second. He pulled her close and she rested her head against his chest, listening to his heartbeat. You gave me everything I didn't know I needed. A family, a purpose beyond power, a reason to build something instead of just protecting what I've taken. You gave me that too, Alicia said. You saw me at my worst, broken and scared and pregnant with another man's child, and you decided I was worth keeping, worth fighting for, worth loving. You were always worth it, Dante said fiercely. You just needed someone to show you. Alessia tilted her head up, and he kissed her, sweet and slow and full of promise. When they pulled apart, she smiled. I signed divorce papers thinking I'd lost everything, she said, echoing her thoughts from that terrible day in the courthouse. Instead, I found a man who looked at me at my most broken and decided I was worth keeping. And you chose to stay, Dante finished. That's the part that still amazes me. You could have walked away at any point, but you stayed. You chose me back. Best decision I ever made. Second best, Dante corrected. The best was keeping Sophia. True. Alessia glanced back toward the nursery, where their daughter slept peacefully, loved beyond measure. We made something beautiful, didn't we? We made a family, Dante said. Out of chaos and violence and terrible circumstances, we built something worth protecting, something real. Something that started on courthouse steps with a collision and a business card. Best collision of my life. Alessia laughed, and the sound carried out into the night, mixing with the scent of roses and the promise of tomorrow. She had a husband who loved her fiercely, a daughter who brought joy to every moment, and a family that had claimed her as their own. She had safety, stability, and a future that stretched out before her full of possibility. She'd walked out of that courthouse thinking the worst was behind her. She'd been wrong. The worst had still been coming. The kidnapping, the threats, the violence that came with loving someone like Dante. But she'd also been right, because the worst was behind her now. And what lay ahead was everything she'd never dared to hope for. Come on, Dante said, taking her hand. Let's go to bed. Sophia will be up in 3 hours demanding attention. How do you know that? Because she's your daughter. Stubborn, determined, and absolutely refuses to follow anyone's schedule but her own. She's your daughter too. That's where she gets the intimidating stare. She's 6 months old, and she already has you wrapped around her tiny finger. Dante grinned, unrepentant. Guilty as charged. They went inside, checking on Sophia one more time before heading to their own room. Alessia changed into pajamas while Dante locked the doors and set the security system. Their nighttime routine so familiar now, it felt like they'd been doing it forever instead of just months. When they finally settled into bed, Dante pulled her close, his hand resting on her hip, his breath warm against her neck. I love you, he murmured, half asleep already. I love you too, Alessia whispered back. And there, in the darkness of their bedroom, surrounded by the safety Dante had built and the family they'd created, Alessia finally let go of the last remnants of fear. She'd been rescued by the right monster. She'd chosen to stay, and she'd built a life more beautiful than any fairy tale. She'd signed those divorce papers believing she was losing everything. Instead, she'd found everything that mattered. And this time, she wasn't just staying because she had nowhere else to go. She was staying because this was home. This was family. This was love in its truest, fiercest, most complicated form. This was hers, and she was never letting it go.